What if I told you that the luxurious interiors of the past were not a paradise, but a golden cage with icy bars? We are used to seeing Victorian mansions in movies as places of endless balls, cozy tea parties, and romantic intrigues by candlelight. In reality, these huge houses were complex industrial mechanisms that consumed tons of coal and required the hard labor of dozens of people. The reality of life in such a house consisted of piercing cold, ubiquitous soot, and a strict schedule, the violation of which was tantamount to a crime. Behind the magnificent facades lay a system where the comfort of some was ensured by the complete invisibility of others. Watch the video to the end to find out how ordinary dust could destroy the reputation of an entire family and why the corridors of the mansion were designed as a maze. Are you ready to learn the truth about how this living machine really worked? The Victorian mansion was divided into two completely different worlds that were never supposed to intersect unless absolutely necessary. The boundary between these worlds was a door covered in green cloth, which muffled any sounds and smells coming from the service area of the house. Behind this door, there was a strict hierarchy reminiscent of an army structure, where everyone had their own specific function and area of responsibility. The entire life of the servants was subordinated to a single goal: to make their presence completely invisible to the owners of the house. The butler was not just the senior servant, but the true executive director of this complex enterprise. He was responsible for the safety of the silverware, the quality of the wine in the cellar, and the impeccable work of the male staff. His working day began long before dawn and ended when the last light in the house was extinguished. The butler was required to know more about the habits and preferences of his employers than they knew about themselves. The slightest mistake in serving or delay in providing a carriage would tarnish his professional reputation. The housekeeper, in turn, managed the female staff and controlled all household expenses down to the last penny. She was responsible for the cleanliness of the linen, the availability of provisions, and the moral character of the maids. She kept the keys to the pantries where tea, sugar, and spices were stored, dispensing them strictly by weight. Her authority was unquestionable, and even the lady of the house often consulted with her about the menu and plans for entertaining guests. The housekeeper was the force that kept the house from chaos and financial ruin. Footmen served as living decorations and at the same time, porters, carrying heavy loads up endless staircases. They were selected for their height and appearance so that they would look harmonious in the house's ceremonial livery. Their duties included opening doors, serving at the table, and maintaining the fires in the numerous fireplaces. The work of a footman required good physical fitness, as they had to run between floors from morning till night. They were paid more than maids, as their uniforms and appearance served as an indicator of the status of the mansion's owner. Maids were divided into several categories, from senior maids to junior maids, who did the dirtiest work. They got up before everyone else to clean the fireplaces and tidy up the living rooms before the owners came down for breakfast. Their invisibility was absolute. If a maid was walking down the hallway and saw the owner, she was obliged to turn away to the wall and freeze. Rooms were cleaned strictly when no one was there. Their lives were spent in constant motion between floors with buckets of water and coal. This whole complex mechanism worked in complete silence, broken only by the ringing of bells in the servants' corridor. A system of bells hung on the wall in the kitchen or a special room, each corresponding to a specific room. By the tone of the ring and the swing of the pendulum, the servants could unerringly determine where the call was coming from and how urgent their presence was. Ignoring the bell was an unacceptable offense, resulting in immediate dismissal. This system of wires permeated the walls of the house like the nervous system of a giant organism. The corridors for servants were designed so that staff could move around the house without being seen by guests. These were narrow, dark passageways, often without windows, hidden behind the main walls of the reception rooms. The staircases for the servants were steep and high, making climbing with trays and coal a real challenge. The architecture of the house dictated the social divide between the inhabitants of different floors. Hidden doors in the wall panels allowed the servants to appear as if from nowhere and disappear just as quickly. Servants lived in the most uncomfortable parts of the house, usually in the attic or basement. Their rooms were small, poorly heated, and furnished with the simplest furniture discarded from the master's quarters. It was unbearably cold here in winter, and stuffy in summer due to the sun-heated roof. There was virtually no personal space, as several people often lived in one room. Despite their proximity to luxury, their lives were Spartan and devoid of basic amenities. Discipline in the house was maintained by strict rules governing every step and every word. It was forbidden to talk loudly, laugh, sing, or use the master's furniture. Days off were extremely rare, usually once a month, and only with the permission of the housekeeper or butler. Any violation of the chain of command was punishable by fines or dismissal without recommendation. The servant's life belonged to the house, and he was not supposed to have any personal interest. This system of invisible labor allowed the Victorian mansion to function like clockwork. The owners could enjoy the illusion that dinner appeared on the table by itself and dust disappeared as if by magic. But behind every clean collar and polished parquet floor were hours of exhausting work. It was a world where human resources were consumed as ruthlessly as coal in the furnaces. We are very interested in hearing your point of view. What do you think about a life where you have to be invisible in your own home? Write about it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new historical insights. Guess how long it took to create a comfortable temperature in such a huge house? The answer will surprise you. It was practically impossible, and fighting the cold was the main daily battle. The Victorian mansion, despite its monumentality, was a structure with huge drafts and icy stone floors. Central heating as we know it today did not exist, and the only source of heat was open fireplaces. The heat from the fireplace spread only a couple of meters, leaving the far corners of the room in a deep freeze. Every morning began with the servants carrying coal to all the living rooms of the huge house. These were heavy cast iron or copper buckets that had to be carried up the stairs to the second and third floors. A single fireplace could burn a huge amount of coal in a day, requiring constant replenishment. In a large mansion, there could be dozens of fireplaces, and they all needed to be maintained. The physical strain of transporting fuel was enormous. Coal was stored in basements, where it was unloaded through special hatches from the street. It was a dirty, dusty room where coal dust covered everything with a thick layer. Footmen had to go down there, fill buckets, and carry them upstairs, trying not to stain their livery and the walls of the corridors. Coal dust was the worst enemy of cleanliness, penetrating into the smallest cracks. The fight against this dust was carried out in parallel with the fight for warmth. Lighting a fireplace was an art that required skill and the right materials. First, paper was laid down, then small chips, and only then pieces of coal of a certain size. If the fireplace began to smoke, it could ruin expensive wallpaper and furniture upholstery, which angered the mistress of the house. Servants had to make sure that the fire burned evenly and did not throw sparks onto the carpet. Cleaning the fireplace grate of ashes was done every morning and was one of the dirtiest jobs. The bedrooms were so cold that the water in the wash jugs could be covered with a crust of ice by morning. To warm the bed, copper or ceramic hot water bottles filled with hot water or hot coals were used. Maids ironed the sheets with special irons before their masters went to bed to remove any dampness. Thick velvet curtains on the windows served not only for beauty, but also for protection from drafts. Wearing nightcaps and woolen underwear was not a tribute to fashion, but a necessity of life. The windows in Victorian houses were single-paned, and there were constant drafts through the cracks in the frames. In winter, bizarre ice patterns formed on the inside of the windows, which, although beautiful, were a sign of the bitter cold. To protect against drafts, special cushions stuffed with sawdust or wool were placed under the doors. Carpets on the floor also served as insulation, but even they did not save from the cold coming from the basement. Coal bills were one of the most significant items of expenditure in the estate's budget. During the cold months, coal consumption reached industrial proportions, and its delivery was a regular event. Saving coal was a constant topic of conversation between the housekeeper and the owners of the house. In the servants' rooms, the fireplaces were rarely lit and only for a short time, so they slept under mountains of blankets. The corridors and stairwells connecting the rooms were practically unheated. The transition from the warm living room to the cold dining room or bedroom was a real test for the body. The ladies wore woolen shawls and capes even inside the house to avoid catching a cold. Drafts blew freely through the house, causing the candle flames to flicker and cast frightening shadows. The chimney system was complex and confusing, penetrating the entire building from top to bottom. These channels required regular cleaning of soot to prevent fires inside the walls. A clogged chimney could cause a room to fill with acrid smoke in a matter of minutes. Soot flying out of the pipes settled on windowsills, roofs, and the clothes of passers-by. Heat in a Victorian home was a sign of wealth and status, accessible to far from everyone. Only very wealthy people could afford to maintain a comfortable temperature in all the formal rooms. For the rest, life in winter turned into a constant quest to keep warm. The cold was a constant, invisible resident of the mansion, dictating its own rules of life. How much do you think this dependence on coal affected the organization of daily life and hygiene? In the next chapter, you will learn about the unique technology that made it possible to feed dozens of people without electricity. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of cooking in the past? The kitchen of a Victorian mansion was not a cozy place for family gatherings, but a real hot workshop working non-stop. At the heart of this workshop was a huge cast iron stove, known as a kitchener, or simply a kitchen machine. It took up almost the entire wall, weighed hundreds of kilograms, and was black from constant use in graphite lubricant. This monstrous device ran on coal and had to burn around the clock, as it took several hours to heat up. Controlling the temperature on such a stove required virtuoso skill and intuition. There were no rotary knobs or digital displays for setting the temperature. The cook regulated the heat by opening and closing numerous dampers, doors, and vents, controlling the airflow. Different parts of the stove surface had different temperatures. In the center was a hot spot for frying, and around the edges were areas for simmering sauces. A mistake in controlling the draft could ruin a complex dish or fill the kitchen with carbon monoxide. The kitchen utensils consisted of dozens of copper pots, saucepans, and baking tins of all sizes. Copper conducted heat perfectly, but required careful maintenance and regular tin plating on the inside. If the tin layer wore off, the copper reacted with the acid in the food, which could lead to poisoning. Cleaning these pots to a mirror shine was a daily duty of the junior kitchen staff. Rows of shiny copper on the shelves were the pride of the cook and an indicator of the status of the house. Cooking began long before the food hit the stove. All ingredients arrived unprocessed: poultry with feathers, fish with scales, vegetables in the ground. Kitchen staff spent hours plucking, gutting, cleaning, and cutting food by hand. There were no electric food processors or blenders. Everything was done with knives, cleavers, and mortars. It was hard physical labor that required strength and endurance. A special place was occupied by the system of spits for roasting meat over an open fire. The mechanism could be driven by hot air rising up the chimney or by a system of weights and counterweights. The meat had to be constantly basted with fat so that it would not dry out and become covered with a crispy crust. The heat from the open fire was unbearable, and the cooks worked in conditions similar to a sauna. The kitchen was located in the basement or ground floor, far from the dining room, so that the smells of cooking would not disturb the masters. This created a logistical problem: how to deliver food to the table hot. The dishes were covered with heavy metal cloches and quickly carried up the stairs or sent up by elevator. The distance from the stove to the table could be tens of meters, which required the coordinated work of the entire team. The menu of a Victorian dinner was impressive in its variety and number of dishes. A 7 to 10 course meal was the norm for a wealthy household, including soups, fish, roasts, game, and desserts. The cook had to time everything so that each dish was ready just as the previous one was being cleared from the table. This required logistics skills worthy of a military general. Pantries and ice houses were an integral part of the kitchen complex. The ice houses stored huge blocks of ice brought in from lakes in winter or imported from Norway. This allowed perishable foods to be preserved and exquisite desserts such as ice cream to be prepared. Inventory management was strict, and every piece of meat or pound of butter was recorded in the ledger. The kitchen floor was usually laid with stone slabs, which were sprinkled with sawdust to absorb grease and moisture. At the end of the day, the sawdust was swept away, and the floor was washed with hot water and lye. Cleanliness in the kitchen was maintained with an iron fist, as dirt attracted insects. Work here did not stop until late at night, when preparations for the next day were completed. The Victorian kitchen was a calorie factory where steam-era technology met traditional craftsmanship. It was a place of noise, steam, the clanging of metal, and the shouts of the chef giving orders. Life here was bustling in both the literal and figurative sense, providing energy to the entire huge mansion. If you enjoyed this story about kitchen secrets, please like this video. Your support helps us find even more interesting facts. What if I told you that laundry was the most dangerous and difficult process in the entire household? In a Victorian mansion, laundry was not a matter of pressing a button. It was a multi-day cycle reminiscent of the work of a chemical plant. The laundry room was usually located in a separate wing or a remote part of the basement, as the process was accompanied by a huge amount of steam and pungent odors. The volume of laundry was enormous. Tablecloths, napkins, bed linen, undershirts, servants' aprons. All of this had to be perfectly white. The process began with sorting and soaking the laundry, which was often done on Sunday evening or early Monday morning. The laundry was divided according to fabric type and degree of soiling, as different materials required different approaches. A variety of natural and chemical agents were used to remove stains, from lemon juice to dangerous acids. Using the wrong reagent meant ruining expensive fabric irretrievably. The main equipment consisted of huge copper vats built into brickwork, under which a fire was lit. Water had to be carried in buckets or pumped by hand and then boiled for hours. The laundresses stood in clouds of thick steam, stirring heavy wet laundry with huge wooden tongs. The humidity in the room was 100%, which often led to respiratory diseases among the staff. Dangerous alkaline solutions and so-called blue were used for bleaching. Blue dye was added to the water during rinsing to neutralize the yellowing of the fabric and give it an optical whiteness. The dosage had to be precise. A little more, and the laundry would turn blue, a little less, and it would remain gray. This required an experienced eye and a steady hand. After washing, the next stage was wringing, for which mechanical rollers called mangles were used. These were large devices with two wooden or rubber rollers between which the wet fabric was passed. It was difficult to turn the handle of such a press, but it was even more dangerous to get distracted and pinch your fingers. The fabric passed through the rollers under enormous pressure, squeezing out every last drop of water. Drying laundry in the English climate was a separate problem. Weather permitting, laundry was hung on ropes in the yard, where it could acquire a fresh smell. But more often than not, it had to be dried in special drying rooms with hot pipes or directly under the kitchen ceiling on wooden frames. The smell of drying laundry mixed with the smell of coal and cooking. Ironing was the final and hottest stage of this marathon. Heavy cast iron irons were used, which were heated on a special stove. There were several irons. While one was being used for ironing, the others were being heated. The laundress had to check the temperature of the iron by holding it to her cheek or spitting on the sole plate. An iron that was too hot could burn a hole, while one that was too cold would not smooth out the creases. Starch was used to shape collars, cuffs, and bonnets. Starching was a delicate art. The mixture had to be boiled to the right consistency so that the fabric became stiff but not brittle. Starch-treated items were then polished with special irons with rounded noses to make them shine like porcelain. The perfect collar was a symbol of a gentleman's respectability. The entire washing cycle took 3 to 4 days, turning the week into an endless cycle of water, steam, and soap. The women who worked in the laundry had incredible physical strength and endurance. Their hands were red and rough from constant contact with hot water and chemicals. The clean, crisp laundry that we take for granted today was the result of titanic efforts in the Victorian era. It was a victory of order over chaos, cleanliness over dirt, achieved through the sweat and health of the laundresses. Did you know that caring for clothes was so difficult? In the next chapter, you will learn why lighting in the home could be deadly dangerous. At dusk, the Victorian mansion was transformed, but not always in a cozy way. Before the advent of electricity, lighting large spaces was a difficult and expensive task. Gas became the primary source of light in wealthy homes, replacing oil lamps and candles. Gas lamps provided bright, even light, but they had many side effects that we don't even think about today. Gas lighting consumed oxygen in huge quantities, making the air in rooms stuffy and stifling. In poorly ventilated rooms, guests often began to suffer from headaches by the end of the evening. In addition, the gas of that time was not pure. When burned, it emitted sulfur compounds and soot. This invisible coating settled on ceilings, paintings, curtains, and furniture, causing them to fade and deteriorate. The open flame of gas lamps posed a serious fire hazard. Women's long dresses, lace curtains, and paper wallpaper could catch fire from the slightest contact with fire. Therefore, gas lamps were often protected by glass shades, which had to be regularly washed to remove soot. In children's rooms and bedrooms, gas was used with caution, with safer candles being preferred. Candles remained an important element of lighting, especially in private rooms and on dining tables. Wax candles were expensive, but they burned cleanly and without odor, while cheap tallow candles smoked and smelled of burnt fat. Footmen were responsible for ensuring that the candles in the candelabra burned evenly and for trimming the wicks with special scissors in a timely manner. Dripping wax could ruin the tablecloth or the polish on the table, which was considered unacceptable. Moving around the house at night was an adventure in itself. The corridors and staircases were often left in semi-darkness, lit only by a dim nightlight. Each family member or guest took a portable candlestick with them when going up to their bedroom. The shadows in the huge house were thick and shifting, giving rise to numerous ghost stories. The smell of gas was a constant companion in Victorian city life and homes. Leaks were common, as pipes and joints were not always airtight. Explosions of domestic gas were not uncommon, destroying walls and maiming people. Servants were therefore strictly forbidden to search for leaks with open flames, although this rule was often broken. It was not easy to light a chandelier in rooms with high ceilings. Long poles with wicks at the end were used for this purpose. The process of lighting the lights in all the reception rooms before reception took a considerable amount of time. It was also necessary to extinguish the lights in a timely manner so as not to waste expensive gas. The interiors of Victorian houses were often decorated in dark, rich colors: burgundy, dark green, brown. This was done not only for fashion, but also to hide the traces of soot from gas lighting in fireplaces. Dark wallpaper and fabrics absorbed light, requiring even more light sources. The advent of electricity at the end of the era was met with a mixture of excitement and fear. Bright electric light mercilessly exposed dirt, scuffs on furniture, and wrinkles on faces that had previously been hidden by dim light. Many ladies preferred the soft light of gas or candles, which was more flattering to their appearance. Lighting was not just a functional element, it created an atmosphere of mystery and austerity. The house lived in rhythm with the changing light and shadows, and controlling this rhythm was part of the daily routine. What if I told you that cleaning a Victorian home was not just a hygienic procedure, but a never-ending war against an invisible enemy? That enemy was the ubiquitous coal dust and soot that entered the house through windows, doors, and even the clothes of those who entered. London's smog, the famous pea soup, left a greasy black film on everything it touched. Fighting this grime required special strategies and tactics. Every morning began with maids scattering wet, used tea leaves on the carpets. This was done not for the aroma, but so that the tea leaves would absorb the dust and prevent it from rising into the air when swept. Then these leaves were swept up with stiff brushes, collecting the dirt brought in from the street. Vacuum cleaners did not yet exist, so cleaning carpets was hard physical labor. Furniture in Victorian homes was intricate, with an abundance of carvings, velvet upholstery, and decorative elements. Every curl on a chair leg, every fold in a curtain became a trap for dust. Maids used a variety of brushes, feather dusters, and rags to reach the most hidden corners. Polishing wooden surfaces with wax was a mandatory procedure that gave the furniture a shine and protected it from dirt. Special attention was paid to protecting works of art and expensive fabrics. When a room was not in use or the family was away, the furniture was covered with special covers made of thick, light-colored fabric. Dust covers. Chandeliers were wrapped in fabric. Carpets were rolled up and sprinkled with camphor to protect them from moths. The house in its preserved state looked like a ghostly kingdom of white figures. The windows were washed regularly, but in a city where the air was thick with soot, they became dirty instantly. Washing the windows on the outside of the upper floors was dangerous work, often done by hired men or the bravest maids. Clean windows were a sign of good housekeeping, as they allowed precious daylight to penetrate inside. The books in the library had to be taken out, dusted, and beaten regularly to prevent bookworms from infesting them. The porcelain figurines, vases, and trinkets that abounded in Victorian interiors required delicate handling. Each item had to be lifted, wiped underneath, and placed back in exactly the same spot. One awkward movement could cost a maid a year's salary. Parquet or tile floors were scrubbed to a mirror shine using heavy brushes tied to the legs or crawling on the knees. Beeswax and turpentine were used for polishing, and their scent was the characteristic aroma of a clean house. The stone floor in the hall was washed daily to remove traces of street dirt brought in on the soles of shoes. The fight against dust also included cleaning clothes. Men's suits and coats were cleaned with stiff brushes, beating the city's soot out of the thick wool. Women's dresses with long hems collected all the dirt from the sidewalks, so they had to be thoroughly cleaned and dried after each walk. Dirt was an external enemy that constantly tried to penetrate the fortress. This war had no end. No sooner had cleaning been completed at one end of the house than it had to be started at the other. Perfect cleanliness was an unattainable ideal that was pursued at the cost of enormous effort. Dust was a symbol of chaos, and cleaning was a way of maintaining civilized order. How much time do you spend cleaning today? In the next chapter, you will learn why it was impossible to get dressed in the morning without outside help. Dressing in the Victorian era was not simply a matter of putting on clothes, but a complex engineering process that required knowledge, time, and most importantly, the help of another person. A wealthy Victorian could not dress themselves. It was physically impossible due to the cut of the clothes and the location of the fasteners. A lady's morning toilet could take up to 2 hours and involve the sequential layering of many items of clothing. It all started with a chemise and pantaloons made of thin cotton or linen. Over them was worn a corset, a rigid structure made of fabric and whalebone or steel plates. The corset shaped the figure, creating a fashionable silhouette, but it also restricted movement and breathing. It was extremely difficult to lace up the corset by oneself, so the help of a maid was required to tighten the lacing on the back with the necessary force. A bodice cover was worn over the corset to hide the stiff ribs, and a bustle or crinoline, a frame that gave shape to the skirt. The bustle was a complex structure made of pads, wire, or horsehair, which was attached at the back below the waist. Several petticoats, often starched to create volume and rustle when walking, were worn over this entire architecture. Only then was the main dress put on, which could consist of a skirt and bodice. The bodice was fastened with dozens of small hooks, buttons, or snaps, often located in hard-to-reach places. The sleeves could be so narrow that the arm had to be literally screwed into them. The maid had to make sure that no fold was crooked and no hook was missed. Shoes were also a challenge. High boots with laces or buttons required the use of a special hook for fastening. It was uncomfortable to put them on while wearing a corset, so the maid often helped her mistress put them on. Stockings were fastened with special garters, which were not supposed to squeeze the leg, but also prevented the stockings from slipping down. Men's suits were simpler, but also required the help of a valet. Starched collars, which were fastened to the shirt with cufflinks, were stiff and uncomfortable. Ties or neckerchiefs had to be tied in a complex knot that had to look flawless. The waistcoat, frock coat, and trousers all had to fit perfectly, without a single wrinkle. Changing clothes happened several times a day. The morning dress was replaced by a walking dress, then a tea dress, and finally an evening gown for dinner. Each time, the whole process was repeated. This required a huge amount of clothing and constant work by the laundry and ironing staff. Hairstyles were no less complicated, often involving the use of hair pieces, chignons, and hot curling irons. Hairstyling was the responsibility of a personal maid who had to be skilled in the art of hairdressing. Hats, gloves, fans, and umbrellas completed the look and were mandatory accessories for leaving the room. Clothing was armor that protected from the outside world and demonstrated status. It restricted movement, forcing the wearer to keep their back straight and move in a measured manner. A person in such a costume could not run or bend over sharply. They could only walk majestically. All this complexity served one purpose: to show that the owner of the clothing was not engaged in physical labor and had enough money to employ servants to help them dress. Clothing was a language that spoke of wealth and propriety. Life in a Victorian mansion was governed by strict etiquette, especially when it came to visits and socializing. The visiting card system was a kind of social currency and a filter that protected the home from unwanted intrusions. It was impossible to just drop in for a visit. It was considered a gross violation of propriety. All contacts took place according to a complex, almost ritualistic pattern. When a guest arrived at the house, they did not enter immediately. A footman or butler would come out to the carriage to accept the visiting card. The guest's name and sometimes their title were printed on a small piece of cardboard. If the hosts were not at home, which often simply meant they did not wish to receive guests, the servant would inform the guest, and the card would be left on a tray. A folded corner of the card could have a special meaning, for example, that the visit was made in person and not through a messenger. If the guest was received, he was escorted to a special reception room or morning room. Visiting hours were strictly regulated, usually between 3 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Morning visits were reserved for close friends or business partners. Staying longer than the customary 15-20 minutes was considered bad form, unless you were specifically asked to stay. The living room had its own geography. The hostess usually sat by the fireplace or tea table. Guests were offered seats according to their status and degree of closeness. The furniture was arranged in groups that encouraged conversation, but did not allow for excessive familiarity. Posture, gestures, topics of conversation. Everything was under control. Conversations had to be light, avoiding controversial topics such as politics, religion, or illness. The art of small talk was the ability to talk about nothing, but beautifully. Pauses in conversation were considered awkward, and the hostess had to skillfully manage the thread of conversation, involving everyone present. The tea ceremony was the central element of the visit. Tea was served in fine porcelain with sandwiches and cupcakes. The ability to hold a cup beautifully, eat neatly, and maintain conversation at the same time was an essential skill. Servants brought in a tray, set it down, and withdrew, leaving the hosts to pour the tea themselves, which created an illusion of intimacy. Refusal to accept an invitation could be expressed very subtly. If you did not receive a return visit or an invitation to a return reception, it meant that the acquaintance was undesirable. Social circles were closed, and it was extremely difficult to enter a new circle. Reputation was everything, and one wrong step could lead to social ostracism. There were clear boundaries between public and private areas in the house. Guests never entered the bedrooms, kitchen, or service rooms. They only saw the front of the house, the living room, dining room, and library. The house was a stage where a performance of prosperity and respectability was played out. For young girls, visits were a way to find a husband. Under the strict supervision of their mothers and chaperones, they learned the art of flirting within the limits of what was permissible. Any glance or word could be misinterpreted, so their behavior had to be impeccable. This system of visits created a sense of stability and order in society. Everyone knew their place and the rules of the game. Although it may seem hypocritical, for Victorians, these rituals were a way to maintain personal space and dignity in a close-knit world of social connections. Dinner in a Victorian mansion was the highlight of the day and the most complex organizational event. It was not just a meal but a solemn ceremony demonstrating the wealth and taste of the hosts. Preparations for dinner began several hours before it started. The dining room had to shine, the silver had to be polished, the crystal had to sparkle, and the tablecloth had to be starched to crispness and without a single wrinkle. The table setting followed strict geometry. The butler used a ruler to measure the distance between the plates and cutlery. Each knife, fork, and spoon had to lie in a strictly defined place. The number of utensils could be intimidating to the unprepared. Each dish had its own tool. The glasses were lined up in order of height or in groups, each for its own type of wine. In the center of the table was placed a surtout de table, a massive silver decoration, often with vases for flowers and fruit. The flowers had to be fresh and match the decor of the room, but not too tall so as not to obstruct the guests' view of each other. Candles in tall candelabra created a solemn lighting, reflecting in the silver and glass. Seating guests was a complex diplomatic task. Rank, titles, family ties, and personal preferences had to be taken into account. The guest of honor was seated to the right of the hostess. A mistake in seating could cause mortal offense. Name cards helped guests find their seats. The table service was carried out by footmen under the supervision of the butler. It was a real ballet. The servants moved silently, serving dishes from the left and clearing them from the right, or vice versa, depending on the style of service. French or Russian. With French service, all dishes were placed on the table at once, while with Russian service, they were served one at a time to each guest. The Russian style became increasingly popular as it allowed the food to remain hot. The menu was abundant and heavy. Soups, fish, meat dishes, game, vegetables, and complex desserts followed one another. Each dish was accompanied by a corresponding wine. The butler made sure that the glasses were never empty, but also that the guests did not cross the line of propriety. Conversation at the table was also regulated by rules. It was not allowed to talk across the table or whisper to a neighbor. The hostess gave a signal to change the topic or end the meal. At the end of dinner, the ladies retired to the living room, leaving the men with port wine and cigars. This was the time for men's conversations. The kitchen worked at full capacity during dinner. The cooks had to send the dishes upstairs in perfect condition. The dumbwaiters creaked as they delivered trays, and dirty dishes were sent downstairs, where dishwashers awaited them. Mountains of dirty porcelain and greasy copperware were the flip side of the splendor upstairs. For the hosts, dinner was work. They had to be witty, polite, maintain their posture, and demonstrate impeccable manners. The ladies' corsets and the men's stiff collars did not allow them to relax for a second. Food was just an excuse for social interaction. A Victorian dinner was a demonstration of man's power over nature and resources. Food from all over the world, complex cooking techniques, an army of servants, all served one purpose: to confirm the status of the owner of the house. It was a theater where everyone played their part until the curtain fell. When dinner was over and the guests had left, the house began to prepare for sleep, transforming into an impregnable fortress. Victorians were obsessed with security and fear of burglars. The procedure of locking up the house was a ritual performed by the butler or senior footman. Every window and every door leading to the garden or the street was checked. Heavy wooden shutters were often installed on the first-floor windows, which were locked from the inside with iron bolts. These shutters not only protected against thieves, but also retained heat. The front door had several locks, chains, and bolts. The keys to the outside doors were collected and handed over to the butler or the owner of the house for safekeeping at night. Special attention was paid to the silver safe or storeroom, where the silverware was kept. This was perhaps the most valuable movable property in the house. The butler often slept in the room next to the safe, sometimes even with a loaded pistol under his pillow. The loss of silver would not only be a financial disaster, but also a disgrace for the chief servant. Before going to bed, all unnecessary lights were extinguished. Gas horns were turned off to prevent leaks. Fireplaces were covered with special screens to prevent sparks from falling on the carpet while everyone was asleep. The house was plunged into darkness and silence, broken only by the creaking of floorboards and the striking of clocks. The separation of the sexes at night was strict, not only for the owners, but also for the servants. The female staff slept in one wing or on one floor, and the male staff in another. Often, the door leading to the women's dormitory was locked by the housekeeper to prevent any nighttime wanderings and to uphold morality. The staircases between the servants' floors could be blocked with grates. Chamber pots were an inevitable attribute of bedrooms, as flush toilets, water closets, were often located only on the first floor or were few in number. It was inconvenient to use them at night, wandering through cold, dark corridors. In the morning, the contents of the chamber pots were taken out by the maids, another unpleasant but necessary duty. For safety, nightlights could be left on in the corridors, dim oil lamps or candles and protective caps. They provided just enough light to prevent people from falling down the stairs if necessary. The shadows cast by these nightlights created the very gothic atmosphere that we love so much in novels of that time. If there was a sick person in the house, night watches were assigned. A nurse or servant would stay awake at the bedside, keeping the fire going and administering medicine. Night was a time of anxiety as medical help was far away, and the darkness intensified fears. Sleeping in a Victorian four-poster bed, wearing a nightcap and a long nightgown, was a rest after a day full of conventions and hard work. Heavy feather beds and woolen blankets weighed heavily, but provided welcome warmth. The house fell asleep, but its heart, the coals in the kitchen stove, continued to smolder so that everything could start again in the morning. The mansion was a living organism that never stopped completely, only slowing its rhythm until dawn. We saw that the Victorian mansion was not just a beautiful decoration, but a complex, demanding, and sometimes cruel machine for living. Behind the glitter of crystal and the rustle of silk lay tons of coal, rivers of soapy water, and endless human labor. The comforts we take for granted today, heat, light, hot food, were then the result of a daily battle with nature and chaos. This era left us with magnificent architecture, but the price of maintaining it was incredibly high. What did you find most unbearable about life at that time? Would you like to try living one day according to the rules of a Victorian home? Or do you value modern comforts more? Write in the comments about what other historical eras you would like to learn the truth about. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos.